So here's some realities of email stats, questions to ask yourself in regards to the reality of email stats. 1, how many subscribers would I likely start out with? 2, how often will they open and read my email? Let's look at some stats. Just give me one moment here just to do something real quick. And I have to adjust my screen a little bit here just for a moment. Okay, here we go. So you'll notice here I have a link for stats. I'm going to show you that link here. And again, this link will actually be in the handout that I give you all. This is an article by MailChimp. Some of you might already be familiar with MailChimp. This is a very, very popular platform for sending out emails. Sorry, for sending out email newsletters. And it's actually the platform that I use and that most artists that I know use. And in fact, I'm going to show one example from another artist later tonight who also uses MailChimp like I do. And I really like this breakdown that they have here on their website, which I have not found many examples of similar graphs or diagrams. What they do here is they break down the type of newsletter readers by industry. So for example, agriculture, food services, architecture and construction. And then here, arts and artists, woohoo! The rate, the average open rate, so meaning the number of people who actually open their email newsletter regarding arts and artists is 26.27%. The average click rate, much, much, much lower. It's only 2.95%. By click rate, I mean someone reads your newsletter, and if there's a link to go check out a video or a link to go check out an Instagram post, whatever it might be, 2.95% of those people actually click on those things. Okay, so let's go back to the reality of email stats. How many subscribers would I likely start out with? How often will they open and read my email? Let's go ahead and imagine those same statistics for you, but those are likely the same statistics for you when you get started, that only 26% of your readers are going to actually read your newsletter, and only about 3% of them are actually going to click on things. Which I will say, one thing that is cool is if you look at the different industries and the average open rate, arts and artists are actually the second highest. Pretty cool. So that's good to know that, like, wow, people in regards to arts and artists, people actually read newsletters. So we'll talk a little bit more about whether or not your audience does. But it is good to think about with the kind of fans and followers you already have online, or just anywhere online you have people who are engaging with you. How many of them are likely to become subscribers to your newsletter? You could actually poll people to find out if they would transfer over to that. Again, something we'll talk about in a little bit, but you can also just kind of take a guess and estimate. All right, so something I hear a lot is people saying, only one person reads my newsletter, so why bother continuing with it? Well, it's helpful to ask yourself how many readers would make your newsletter worthwhile. So for example, if 25 readers would make it worthwhile for you, like let's say I'm going to put a newsletter out and I just want to have 25 readers, like that will make me feel like it's worth my time to be making a newsletter. Then that means I should aim for 100 subscribers. Because again, if we're thinking about that 26% average open rate. So maybe I will give myself a goal of gaining 100 subscribers in 1 year. And if I don't reach my goal by the end of the year, at that point, I can always go back, reflect, and think about, is this the best strategy to continue, or should maybe I try something different? Something I always encourage people to do, particularly in the social media classes that I've taught in the past, is to really try a strategy for a full year if you can. Really, really try it. Like, don't half-ass it. Don't give up on it too quickly. You're not going to really know if it works until you really give it a go. So try to do it for a whole year if you can. And keep in mind, most of the time that the reason for low stats, like for people not reading your email or not clicking on things, is because the newsletter just isn't good. It's just not interesting enough. So this leads to the next question. Who is your audience, and do they even read your newsletters? As I mentioned, you can take polls. Like you can go and survey your audience and find out if they actually read your newsletters. This is an example diagram, which some of you might have seen from previous classes that I've done in the past. This is an example diagram of, for my podcast, the type of audiences that we have. You'll see we have 3 subsets of audiences here. And that's the logo for our podcast, by the way, Reflect, Recalibrate. That's the name of our podcast. And for these 3 subsets of audiences, we're trying to think about how our newsletter could be interesting to those 3 people. So essentially, newsletter, what we want to say and what we think is interesting. We're really trying to think about who's our target audience and what kind of content are they interested in. You'll notice here that I put black boxes over the content that I think our audience is interested in, because next week we will talk more about strategies and goals. In the class that I'm teaching next week, which is called Planning a Newsletter Campaign, we will talk more about strategies and goals. So that's where I'll talk a little bit more of like, well, what kind of content, in this example, what kind of content may each one of these subset audiences be looking for online that relates to what we're doing with our podcast, and how might our newsletter provide that content? So providing the content they want, in addition to whatever else we think is interesting that we want people to know about. And then in doing that, we can really make sure that the newsletter is good and so that the people actually read it and hopefully click on it. Okay, so I will also share a link in the handout that has a little bit more statistics about who actually reads newsletters. It tends to be older audiences, just so you know. Like we did already look at some stats about artists and arts and who reads, how many people read those newsletters. But generally, just so you know, demographically, it tends to be older audiences that read newsletters.